Hello and welcome to Journey into Grace. My name is Tim Cole.
And I'm Jim Davis.
And we're delighted to welcome you back to participate in our interactive discovery process, right? We are diving into the subject of grace, and we feel like people who have been given a deed to a mine that we know has got pay dirt. We're going to hit
Big
it.
time.
We're going to hit it. We're going to strike it rich, and we really have. Isn't that what Paul said, Ephesians 1, right? The riches of His glory, we've been given that. And the grace of God is what gives us access into the riches. So we've been talking about a working definition for grace. So what's that definition we've been working on?
God's unearned, undeserved, unmerited favor toward us.
So his emotional state as He thinks about us is
one of joy, happiness, delight, pleasure. We are the apple of His eye. He loves us in an unrestricted, unreserved way. And it's all because of us accepting the gift that He gave us in Jesus Christ, believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Lord.
I'm always intrigued by what Paul says about the end. What we will be like Him because we will see Him as He is.
As He is.
And what I get from that is a principle: the more clearly we can see God as He is, the more we can become who He wants us to be, or we were created to be. So take that and apply to this. If our minds have been twisted and we think God's angry, if that's how we see Him, we can only live our lives reflectively out of that revelation, right? So we can live with frustration. We can carry all sorts of things.
Sin consciousness.
Perfectionism, performance, all those things. But if we see God as a God who is actually emotionally engaged with us, with all these great emotions, like He's not just rejoicing over us, He's like really seriously rejoicing over us because he feels that toward us. I mean, to me, that's part of the freedom that comes in grace. It's the revelation of who He is that allows me to now take that deep breath and go, oh, it's the feeling of actually being accepted.
And being His son, we'll talk about this in another episode, but how vital it is for us to appreciate our identity, who we are now because of Jesus. That we're not orphans, we're not some standalone little island that God visits every now and then, but we've been brought into the center of His love, into the center of everything that is meaningful in this life and the life to come, and we're there because of Jesus. And because of Jesus, now God looks on us in a special way. In that special way, He calls favor.
Wow.
He favors us. Whatever else is going on, whoever else is involved, God looks on us, each one individually, and pours favor into our situation, our circumstances.
I feel, as you're talking, I'm tearing up because I'm remembering the story of the prodigal father. It's really the prodigal father. It's the prodigal son too, because he did excess in his leaving of his father's ways and his father's family, but it's more a story about the prodigal father, because it's really a story about the excesses of the favor of a father who, and that's why I'm tearing up, because I so desperately needed God to re-accept me, to overlook what I had chosen, and I'd made choices against Him, and I so desperately I relate to that prodigal son, and I know a lot of us do, and I just to know that God really is like that prodigal father. He's standing in the city waiting. When he sees us afar off, He's running to us. That's the kind of God that is attractive to me. And we're not just making God in our own image, and that's some of the concerns some people have about Grace Message, is that we're watering God down. That's not true at all. That's
we're elevating Him.
That's the way Jesus revealed Him, as this prodigal father, and He really is that way.
Well, and just that term, I think that more people read into that term than define the term. They look at it as the prodigal son. Oh, that's the wayward son, the son that went away, and what does prodigal mean, Tim?
I can't remember. Tell me.
Let's see. It means something like extravagant, doesn't it?
Extravagant.
So this is the son. Yes, he extravagantly wasted the father's wealth, But as you said, it's more about the Father and this extravagant Father that ignored all of that and demanded nothing of the Son but to come to him.
And then he gave him his ring back. He put shoes on he gave a robe, killed the fatted calf. I mean, it's just
restored him to his rightful place of son.
And that's what grace
That's what
does.
grace
That's the gospel of grace.
Elevates you.
So we're really mining gold here. We're mining gold about a reality of who God actually is. And when we do that, it actually allows us to live up to the reality of who he created us to be. Phenomenal. So we've been working off this definition: unmerited, undeserved, unearned favor. Yeah. There's a second definition that's the primary definition from the Greek word charis. The secondary definition is one that says, carries the idea of especially the divine influence on the heart. So the first one has to do with really characterizing how he feels toward us when he sees us and looks at us, and therefore his actions toward us. But the second definition has to do with this idea of divine influence on our hearts. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Well, I think that another definition, if you will, with regard to that is God's divine enablement, that there is this supernatural ability that comes to us through the favor of God that allows us or equips us or empowers us to do what was impossible for us to do before. I had no power against sin. I could deny sin. I could work my way out of some things. I could with enough strength of will, fight against some things for some period of time. But at the end of the day, I had no power to stop sin's progress in my life.
Paul
it had
said
dominion over me.
Yeah, Paul said exactly in Romans. He said, "Until Christ, sin reigned." Right? It ruled over us.
And that was certainly my testimony. And so when grace came, I was empowered by grace to take my attention off of sin and what it was doing to me and what I was doing with it to Christ, who had freed me from its bondage, freed me from those chains. And now I felt a power to rise above that, a power to shake off those shackles and begin to walk as a free man, not be held bondage, to not be dominated by the power of sin's influence in my life.
It strikes me that the things that rule us define our view of ourselves, right? If I'm ruled by good things, if I have a lot really good attributes, character that I live out, that helps shape a good image of myself, right? But if I'm living, if I'm an alcoholic, or if I'm addicted to pornography, or if I'm, fill in the list, whatever that looks like, it's a 5-letter word, shame, right? We become identified with shame. I think as you were talking, I go back to the garden, and I think this is the power of grace. It's power. It's the power of God into our lives. It's a divine power. What is it power for? As you were talking, it strikes me, in Jesus, he's restored us back to the freedom to choose again. That's what we had in the garden. Right?
And be able to actually live out the choice. Because when I was born again, I chose to live above my sin. I chose to live apart from it and live a life for God. But I kept falling back in and falling back in, falling back in, until finally you begin to question, well, am I as saved as I should be? Was there something that was missed along the way? Did I not get the full DNA of my Father? I have this terrible flaw in me. And so that feeds into that self-image again. Okay, I'm this flawed human being.
I've got the ick.
Exactly. I've got this shame thing on me, and I'll try to hide it from other people as best I can, but I'm terrified all through my life that others are going to see in me what I see in myself.
That's so true.
And turn from me and just reject me. I don't want to have anything to do from you. What business do you have representing God when you've got this in you? And so there was this constant turmoil within that God's power through grace lifted me out of and gave me a new identity, or gave me my real identity.
Come on, that's
I began to see myself through his eyes rather than through my experience and through what others might have thought of me or said about me.
And when you're describing that, that feeling of shame that we carry like a yoke around our neck, I was thinking about how that affects our ability to relate to others and to God. I know when I'm carrying that, what am forced to do is protect myself.
Yeah.
I'm forced to do what Adam and Eve did in Fig Leaf, to try to cover that shame. And they were hiding from God instead of running to go walk with him in the cool of the day. And I know for myself, I did that as well. But when I do that, what that does, unintentionally, it creates a barrier between you and I. So now my relationships on this planet are shallow at best, and I'm not able to get out of those relationships with the fulfillment that he intended, and then turn that vertically. We do the same thing. We build these walls, and we don't realize that what we're doing is we're actually protecting ourselves. We think we're protecting ourselves from harm, but we're protecting ourselves from the only thing that can solve the thing that's wrong on the inside of us.
You're exactly right. And we take that false image, that plastic fantastic that we hold between ourselves and other people, so that they see this image that we want to portray rather than who we really are. And then we turn to God and try to do the same thing.
God.
Yeah,
I'm okay.
I'm okay. I'm not as bad as you might have heard. And so we have this false relationship out of our false image, because grace not only empowered me to be free of sin. And when I say free of sin, I'm not talking about it's this absolute that I sin no more. That's not what I'm talking about. I just know that even when I sin, I had the power to not sin.
Yeah.
I made a choice. I allowed myself to be brought into something, but I didn't have to. Yeah. I know that I could have kept from that because of the power that's in me. But it also empowers me in my relationship to God. I now can live like Jesus intended for me to live. I can live like God put me on this planet to be able to live. I have the power to do it. Whether I'm doing it or not, I know that within me I have the power to.
That's so good. I think... last thought for me, I think of Jesus as our example, and it says that in Luke it says that he grew in wisdom and stature and favor, grace, with God and man. And it says in another place that the grace of God was on him. And I just think if he's our example, and he is, and he was a recipient of his Father's grace, as the Son of God, think about it, he was completely clean of sin. And in order for him to complete his assignment, he still needed to receive in full measure that empowering grace of God.
Hallelujah.
I mean, shouldn't that really put it in right perspective for us, how desperately we need that empowerment from God on a daily basis, every day of our lives?
And grace is there to give it to us.
Without measure.
Without
right?
measure.
Again, I just go back to John 1. In him we get grace upon grace.
Just keep stacking up the grace.
So you need a little more power in your life? Do you need a little more confidence to be able to overcome? Do you need to regain the control, the self-control? It's a fruit of the Spirit, and it comes out of the grace of God. Amen. We'd love to hear about your journey. What about you? Your journey into grace? Email us, grace@destinycc.net. Thank you so much for being with us today.
And until next time, grace and peace to you.